Hello everyone, and welcome to all of you joining us for today's webinar. So this webinar is about studying for the SQE, and it's aimed both at those already working towards their SQE qualification, as well as those who are thinking about qualifying as a solicitor and looking at their different options. So in today's session, we're going to look at the different options that are available for preparing for the SQE, and we're going to look in particular at the different types of preparatory courses, as well, of course, the option of self-study. For those of you who don't know me, I am Maxine Waugh, and I'm Head of Education and Training at the SRA. And with me today, I've got three speakers who are already on their SQE journey or have in fact completed their SQE journey. And those speakers are going to share their experiences and their top tips on studying for the SQE. So I'm delighted to be joined by Amits Kapoor and Sian Saunders, who are both newly qualified solicitors, and also by Hafsa Arif, who is currently working towards qualification through the SQE. So as I've said, they're going to share their experiences of the SQE with us. I should make it clear that this isn't a revision class. We won't be teaching you any law, and we won't be teaching you how to take multiple choice exams. But we will be asking our participants to share their tips on how to study or how to get ready for the exams. So I'm also joined by my colleague, Richard Williams, who is a policy manager at the SRA. And Richard will be giving us information about the SQE training market and also some advice on what to think about when deciding on what type of course to undertake or whether to self-study. So as always with these webinars, we can take questions. So please do send them through to us. There's a link below the webinar. As I always say, we probably won't be able to answer all of the questions, but we will try and cover as many of them as we can. And in fact, we've already had quite a few questions in ahead of the webinar, and I will be asking some of those questions as we go through. And then finally, before we get started, we do also have a feedback form in the description below the webinar, and we'd really appreciate it if you take that time to fill that out afterwards. But I will remind you again at the end of the session. So we've got quite a lot to get through, so let's get started. Let's start with you, Richard. So there's lots of different ways that people can study for the SQE. Does the SRA set any regulatory requirements about what courses people should take?
Thanks, Maxine. There isn't a regulatory requirement that an individual looking to qualify as a solicitor through the SQE needs to complete any preparatory training or complete any type of course. But that being said, I think it should be fairly obvious that some candidates might need to take a course if it's in their interest to do so. And we do not I think it's worth pointing out as well that we do not regulate, authorise or accredit any organisation offering SQE training as well. And our kind of approach to this is really because the SQE is a centralised assessment, it means all qualifying solicitors have met the same standard regardless of the route they have taken. So as a result, and given we've got that kind of centralised assessment, we don't need to prescribe in detail what preparatory training should look like or what an individual's qualification journey should look like. And I think one of the outcomes of that approach is that we're now seeing quite a diverse SQE training market. This means there is more flexibility in how candidates can prepare themselves for the SQE. There's more choice, more ways to train that align with an individual's personal circumstances. There's more opportunities also to prepare in a way that meets an individual's preferred learning style and training at more affordable options.
Thanks, Richard. So you said that the SRA doesn't authorise SQE training providers, and one of the benefits of that is that it's an open marketplace. But how do people know what courses are available?
One starting point is to go to our website. on our website, we've published a list of organisations that have told us that they provide SQE education, tutoring or training services, or produce SQE related study materials and resources. And we've done that to help potential SQE candidates identify the range of organisations that carry out SQE training. So that list contains information about the providers themselves, the courses they offer, the cost of the courses, the course length, and details about where an individual can go to get more information. So we're not the only source of information about this. There are lots of other websites that provide information and details on SQE courses that are available and might well be helpful for someone looking to understand what types of courses are available. Just to pick up two examples I'm aware of, I know Legal Cheek have lots of information about this, as do LawCab. Their websites enable you to kind of select different courses and compare different information about them. But I think, kind of anyone who wants to find out more can do a little bit of Googling and find out lots of information about the types of courses available.
Thanks, Richard. And we'll come back to you towards the end of the session with some more hints and tips. But I want to move on now to our other speakers. Let's start with you, Sian. So you studied for SQE alongside a master's course, and we've had quite a few questions in about the master's course option. So can you tell us, how did that work and why did you choose that option?
Yeah, of course. So I personally chose the master's course to do the SQE route through because it just worked for me. I qualified through my law degree about 4 years prior to me sitting the SQE. So I knew that I would benefit from taking the additional courses and getting a bit of a refresher on some of the law. Additionally as well, I was looking to do a master's degree, and it's now offered by different providers that you can do this combined with the SQE. That worked for me, and it was great because it also means that you can get government funding to do the SQE additional courses alongside a master's degree. I personally chose to do the master's course and SQE training full time. There is other options where you can do part-time as well. I did this alongside working, and in hindsight, I probably would have chosen the part-time course, but there are different options out there, and at the time it worked best for me.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sian. And that point about access to the government loans is an important point about the master's courses, isn't it? And I know that's important for some people. So Richard's talked about the type of information that's available when people are trying to decide what type of course to do. Can you tell us what sort of information did you use to help you make your decision?
Yeah, so when I initially started looking, the SQE was quite new. I sat the second set of exams, so there wasn't a whole load of information online, and there was very limited course providers at the time. There are a lot more course providers now, which is great, and a lot more information online. But personally, I looked at the different providers, I looked on their websites just to see what it is they offer, how they do the teaching, just to make sure it suited me. I also did speak to some of my friends who did the training before myself and sat the exams before myself, just to get their opinions on their providers as well. So I would definitely recommend speaking to anyone you know to get their experience as well.
Yeah, great advice. Speaking to others, I'm sure, is a really good idea. Thanks, Sian. Now, we do hear a lot, and I'm sure you're going to back this up, that, SQE is a tough exam. It's a tough journey to be on. So what for you was the biggest challenge that you faced when you were studying for the SQE, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think my biggest struggle was definitely the mental fatigue, and also trying to fit in all the revision while working. I made different timetables, and it was through trial and error to find how my timeframes and studying would work. You just kind of need to study when you can and try not to overload yourself. The mental fatigue is quite hard. I overcame that by just taking breaks and doing things that I enjoyed, such as going to the gym or spending time with friends. I think it's very important to take a break from the studying, and just take a step back sometimes. It can help clear your mind and just kind of reduce the mental fatigue, because it is a lot of studying. So yeah, I think just try and pace yourself with the studying.
Great advice. Thank you, Sian. I'm going to move on to you now, Amit. So you self-studied, Amit, for SQE1, and you passed in the top quintile. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And just a reminder for those who are watching, SQE1's the test of functioning legal knowledge, and it must be passed before you take SQE2, which is the legal skills test. So we've had a question, Amit, about whether it is possible to pass SQE without doing a prep course. So can you tell us why you chose to self-study for SQE1, and what did you see the benefits of self-study?
Sure. So for me, there were two reasons that led me to decide to self-study, and they kind of fed into each other. The first reason was that when I started looking at the SQE training market, coming to law from a very non-traditional background, most of the SQE providers took a view that I needed to go through a long form of training. And the window that I had left for myself to complete the SQE and become a lawyer was probably not long enough to accommodate that. So I decided that I was better off relying on my own instincts. And the second was, it was a bit of a wacky one, because I was coming into law from a fairly comfortable career as a consultant. So it would have been all too easy for me to do the exams and not really make the switch, because it was convenient to remain employed in my previous role. So I wanted to keep an audacious challenge for myself. And I just thought, if I am able to pass the SQE unaided, let that be the decision. Of course, I then ended top quintile, which made it a lot more easier to achieve. I think you also asked me about the benefits of self-study. So I'd say one of them is, I didn't feel contained. I was basically charting my own course. I don't think any SQE provider in the land would have backed me to pass the SQE within 4 months without a law degree, and that too in the top quintile. But I could afford to take that challenge on. So I think that was the one of the big reasons, and one of the big benefits I see. The second is, because I was going to qualify straight into a solicitor, having accumulated my qualifying work experience in the past. I presume that looking at legal text and applying that knowledge is the predominant way in which lawyers practice. And I just thought, starting to work in that way around SQE would make me ready to practice law when I become a lawyer. So that's the other reason.
Well, it obviously worked for you, Amit, but I'm sure people that are listening are thinking, "Oh, that sounds quite hard." How did you actually find it in practice?
Bear in mind that I have an undergraduate degree in engineering. This dates back to a quarter of a century, so really old times. And I have a master's in business administration. Both of those, compared to law, require a lot of study, but also a lot of experiential learning. So you learn by observation, doing things. And there's a lot about the way in which you do things that makes you a good engineer or a good manager. By contrast, I thought law was easier in the sense that all of the law can be expressed in the written form. So it is entirely logical and plausible that someone should be able to read the law, understand it, and apply it in context. So it is complicated, and the complicating factor is that there is a lot of law that you need to know on the 5 days of examination that you go through. But that said, I felt it was doable, which is why I kind of ventured into it.
Thanks, Amit. So you mentioned there that you didn't have a law degree before you started your SQE studies. We have had a question in from somebody who sent in the question before the webinar, who was asking, is it possible for someone working in legal services to study for the SQE without having a law degree? So what would your advice be from your own experience in that position?
My experience was that it was possible. I mean, I did have a lot of experience around commercial contracts. not working in a law firm. It was as a contracts manager. And what that helped me do was when I kind of looked at course material, I could simply skim on because there were very few questions that cropped up in my mind as I read through. So what I saw myself being able to achieve was cover a lot of ground in a short time when I did subjects I knew about. But of course, nobody works in 7 areas of law. So even if you are in legal services, there might be life experiences that you can draw upon. So I have no experience work-wise in terms of anything to do with FLK2. So I had no experience of criminal law, wills, or property. But I did have experience of, seeing a conveyancer work on my home purchase. I was unfortunately also a victim of a petty crime once, so I know how the magistrate court systems work. And all of this experience does help you uh, resonate when you start reading the material, and it all hangs together. So I think any life experience and legal experience, I would say, is very relevant.
Thanks, Amit. And one more question for you before we move on to our next speaker. So you self-studied for SQE1, but for SQE2, you decided to go with a course provider and you did a prep course. So can you tell us about your SQE2 course and why you decided to take a course for SQE2?
Sure. So the SQE2 course I did was a 20-week part-time course. And I was very clear that I was going to do an SQE2 course. Firstly, because the problems I had with SQE1, where there was a level of segregation in course providers, given my kind of unique background, not having done a law and wanting a short course, that kind of went away. Because for SQE2, the only criteria is, have you passed SQE1? So I had got there. So everything was open to me. But the second, probably more important reason, having attended one of the SRA webinars at the time, I understood that SQE2 work is marked by qualified solicitors. So it was all very good if I thought I was a good advocate or a good legal writer or a good legal researcher. It was very important that the outputs of what I do land on a solicitor and they give me the feedback on my work, which is why I felt doing the course on SQE2 was a no-brainer, just to have that feedback element.
Thanks, Amit. Well, as we said, obviously the approach you took obviously worked for you because you are now qualified as a solicitor.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to Hafsa, who is still on the SQE journey. Hafsa, you studied for SQE1 by taking a part-time diploma course. Can you tell us about that course and why you decided to study in that way?
Yeah, so I studied a diploma course part-time. And the reason why I opted for the diploma was because I was an international student, and the country that I come from, they do have put emphasis and importance on level 7 degrees, diplomas. So I decided to do it that way. Also, the reason for it being part-time was because I was undertaking my qualifying work experience at the same time. And the provider provided me with an option to study on a Saturday part-time, and there was opportunity to do that in the morning or evenings. So that really worked with my schedule back then, and it was quite manageable to do it that way. So that was the main reason why I chose to study the diploma course and part-time.
Thanks, Hafsa. And we've talked about the range of information that's available. Did you use any particular information when you were making that decision?
Yes. So in order to make the decision, I did speak to students who were undertaking the same course with different providers, and also students who had passed the course or were working towards it, students who had done full-time courses, part-time courses, those who were doing the qualifying work experience. So similar to what I was doing, and that was my main point of contact, the students basically. And then of course there's quite a lot of information available online on different providers, and they do have case studies or students that have given feedback. So that was my approach towards choosing the diploma and the provider and the course.
Thanks, Hafsa. So we also heard that from Sian, didn't we, that talking to students is beneficial. So that seems like that's a good piece of advice for people that are watching. And the type of course that you did, Hafsa, as we say, it was a part-time diploma course. What do you think were the benefits of studying in that way?
So, as I said, I wanted to do my qualifying work experience as well as study for the SQE exams at the same time. So one of the benefits, of course, was that I managed to complete my qualifying work experience side by side my SQE studies. And while I was doing the practical side of work, of course, as my qualifying work experience, as well as studying for SQE2, it also somewhat helped me with my SQE2 preparation while I was studying for SQE1 and undertaking my qualifying work experience. So it was a blend of practical work as well as studying at the same time. So that was really keeping me applying my theoretical knowledge into practice, which again was really beneficial and helpful for my SQE2. So that was, I think, a big benefit of it, as well as the fact that I managed to complete my qualifying work experience and studies at the same time. So I didn't wait for my diploma to be completed before and then do the qualifying work experience, or vice versa, but I did that at the same time together.
Thanks, Hafsa. So it was that blend of the practical and the studying that in your circumstances worked particularly well for you.
Yes, so it's the flexibility, I would also say, the flexibility and the blend of both practical and theoretical study at the same time.
Great, thank you. Let's come back to you, Sean, because we've had a question about the mental fatigue that is experienced when taking SQE exams, and you've already mentioned that to us. Do you have any other advice or top tips on dealing with that type of mental fatigue when studying for the SQE?
Yeah, of course. So the exams themselves are exams, you know, they're not like any other exams. They were nothing that I've ever experienced before. They are extremely long. My top tip for that would be to do it at home before. You know, there's a lot of, especially for SQE1, multiple choice questions that you can have access to, especially if you're with a provider. I would definitely recommend sitting there and trying to mimic the condition of the exams, just to get used to it so you know what to expect. And especially with the mental fatigue before, like I said, just take time out for yourself. If you do have a schedule that you're working towards with revisions and timeframes and timings, try and stick to it. It is very important, to take time out, and especially if you look back and reflect, if some things are not making sense or seem a little bit hard, it's always good to step back, because that can definitely help. Just remember to just take time for yourself, I think, and definitely try and mimic the exam conditions.
Thanks, Sean. Great tips. Taking time out for yourself in particular sounds like a really great idea. Amit, let's come back to you. You were working part-time alongside your studies, as were some of our other speakers, and we've had a question in about how to balance work life and the SQE when you do all those things together. How did you manage that?
I think in short, the answer was making conscious choices. So I chose, for one, a passage of time where I was going to be least interrupted. So in terms of work, for example, I was at a time in my role where things were cruising along and did not require a lot of intervention of my time. I was in a part-time job, so the situation will be different for a lot of the listeners today. But I think making conscious choices also includes things like, I don't remember, for example, starting a Netflix series in that period. Anything that hooks you on and takes you away from legal studies, obviously things you got to avoid. The second thing I did was I chose to do my study over Kindle. Now, the advantage was I had Kindle on my phone, I had Kindle on my work browsers, my home browsers, and I had a Kindle device as well, which meant I could squeeze time out of, various times of the day. And we don't often recognize that there's a gold mine of wasted moments that we can all make the most of. And I started getting a kick out of that as well. So it was about maximizing those opportunities that I think worked for me.
That's great. Thanks, Amit. I want to talk now about SQE1 and studying for SQE1. I'm sure we've got some people watching today who are going to be taking SQE1 in July. We've had a question in asking, what advice would you give to anyone taking SQE1 in July? So Hafsa, can you give any advice to anyone who's soon to be taking the exam?
Yes, sure. So I'd say there are quite a lot of MCQs, mock exams available online. So practice as much as you can, be consistent, organized, and work under exam conditions. So that would really help you to get into that situation, and do not panic. Of course, it's quite obvious to get anxious during exams or closer to the time. So I'd say, yeah, be organized, stay consistent, and practice as much as you can.
Thanks, Hafsa. And Sean, same question for you. Any advice for anyone just about to take the exam? Oh, Sean, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, my advice is very similar. Just test, keep going through the multiple choice questions. I also think as well, you know, when I was studying for SQE1, it can get quite frustrating. You think, you know, that you want to know everything, and it's virtually impossible. So I definitely think a top tip as well for when revising is just remember that it is impossible for you to know everything, and you just need to be proud of the revision that you have done so far, and just try and stay on top of it and just maintain that momentum.
Great, thank you. And Amit, we've had a very specific question in for you, and that question is, how did you practice MCQs when you were self-studying? Is there some kind of tool or website that you used to do this?
Yes, so initially I was using commercially available books that had at the end of every chapter a set of MCQs. It wasn't enough practice, and I think by the very fact that they were at the end of every chapter meant that the questions weren't holistic because they only focused on the section you studied. So towards the end, I took a subscription from one of the providers. I think it was Oxford University Press, and they were selling just an MCQ tool. So I used that to up my preparation on the MCQs.
Thanks, Amit. And we've had another question, which I'll ask you, Amit, which is, when you were learning for SQE1, is there any particular order that you followed when you were learning the topics that were going to be assessed?
Yes. So in my case, I wanted to get comfortable with SQE2 before SQE1. But bear in mind that when I gave the exams, we had the mandatory 3-day gap between the FLK1 and the I said SQE1 and SQE2. I meant FLK1 and FLK2. So I focused on FLK2 before FLK1. But bear in mind that we had a mandatory 3-day gap between the FLK1 and the FLK2 exams, which meant that by the time you turned up for your first FLK1 exam, you really needed to be on top of your FLK2 content as well, because you'd only get a breathing space of 3 days. I think things have now changed, probably become slightly more manageable, where people can have a 9 or a 12-day gap between the two exams. So I would say it's probably wiser to kind of do the FLK2 first, but remember that you're going to get that additional time later on to perfect that knowledge.
Thanks, Amit. And we've had one other question in, which Hafsa, I'll ask you, because you were working full-time, I think, weren't you, when you were studying? And someone's asked, I mean, I guess this is going to be different for everybody, but what's your advice on the ideal time that one should invest per week if you're also working when you're studying?
Yeah, so in terms of timings, I always say it really depends on person to person and how you learn. So I wouldn't say like fixed 5 hours or 20 hours, because it also depends on the subject that I'm revising for, studying for, and how easily I grasp it. So I don't really believe in spending specific hours on certain subjects. I just think that read and understand, clarify your concepts, apply the knowledge, because that's the best way forward. And of course, if you have, say, for example, a particular time limit for when you want to give your exams, that's more about being organized. but I am somebody who wouldn't stick to 5 hours if I needed more time in a particular week. And in terms of my course, they required me to study 20 hours. Sometimes I would do more than that. Sometimes I'd do less. Again, it really depended on which module I studied and how much time I had for that. But in terms of me being working full-time and also doing the course part-time, and having a work-life balance, as well as, of course, having to spend time on my hobbies and other things, I would definitely, I tried to break it down for myself in a week. And again, I wouldn't spend particular hours on a particular week. It really depended on how much I could grasp and just make sure that I was understanding and grasping the information that I wanted to retain it. So it doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as you're 100% sure on what you're learning.
Thanks, Hafsa. I'm going to give our three speakers a little break and come back to you, Richard. So we've heard from our speakers about the sorts of things to think about when deciding how to study and choosing a training provider, but what would your advice be, and what sort of help does the SRA provide with this?
Thanks, Maxine. Yeah, and we've heard some really great tips from Sean, Amit and Hafsa there about how they've gone about deciding which course to proceed with and how they're prepared for the SQE. So in addition to what they've said, I think the only bits that I would add was that we have published resources on our website, the SRA's website, to help individuals think through some of the things that might well be important when choosing a training provider. And I suppose kind of to summarize those and kind of give 3 or 4 top tips, I think the first one is it's really important to make sure that the training you choose covers all of the topics tested in the SQE1 or SQE2 assessments, or where there are gaps in your knowledge. I think it's really important to think about how you as an individual learn. What's your learning style? Do you learn best through listening or discussing, through reading and reflecting, through hands-on practical activities? Are you better off kind of learning online or face-to-face? And then think about what course or courses that align with that your kind of preferred learning style. I think it would be really difficult not to have a conversation about SQE training and not talk about kind of how it's funded, and there's some really good examples that the panelists have said there. So, think about how you're going to fund your training. And again, we've seen the range from the panelists here. We have self-study up to different approaches. And then I think it's just really to reiterate what the panelists have said. There's so much information out there about the quality of training, and you can speak to other people, but there's also, again, lots of information online. So, if you can access any feedback from candidate surveys from any organisation that you're thinking about taking a course with, that's not a bad idea. And there are also websites like Trustpilot or Discover Uni, for example, which often give feedback or have feedback from people that have taken that training.
That's great. Thank you very much, Richard. So I'm going to turn now to some of the questions. We have answered quite a few of the questions actually that have come in, but I'm going to look at some of the other ones that we've had in. Richard, we've had a few people that have asked us about what would be the best option, either the LPC or an LLM, which incorporates SQE1 and SQE2. Can we give any advice on that?
It's a really tricky one to answer, Maxine, because, obviously people have very different personal circumstances. But I think in terms of, I suppose, kind of general advice, think about all the things that have been talked about and said in this webinar. Have a think about whether you fall into the transitional arrangements, and you can go find those on our websites. Or if you have a training contract, then you might want to consider the LPC route. But if you already have work experience that could count as qualifying work experience, you might want to consider the LLM route. But that's not the only option. There's lots of options out there and a wide range of courses that you might want to consider.
And we've heard lots of those today already, haven't we? So yeah, so I think the answer to that one, I'm afraid, is it depends on your personal circumstances. So we've also had quite a few questions about qualifying work experience, which of course is one of the other requirements as well as taking the SQE. That isn't the subject of today's webinar, so we're not going to answer those questions, but we do have a lot of information about qualifying work experience on our website. And Richard and I have also done a couple of other webinars specifically on qualifying work experience. They're on our YouTube channel, so do please take a look at those if that's what you're interested in. Sian, let's come to you. We've had a question from someone who's asking, did you use resources other than those provided by your training provider when you were studying?
I did use some other resources. Like I said, there's a lot of information now online where people put out different revision resources. I personally used mainly the course providers' revision materials, but also you can go and visit places like the Magistrates Court. I think that's really good, especially for SQE2. So I went to sit in there because you can see advocacy being carried out. And again, platforms like YouTube, there are a lot of different videos from over the years of people carrying out, you know, client interviews, advocacy. So I definitely use those as well. And I would definitely recommend, yeah, branching out.
Thanks, Sian. And Hafsa, what about you? Did you use any resources other than those provided by your training provider?
Yes, so when I did start my course back in the day, so there wasn't much information available online on for other resources, but now there's quite a lot. There's a lot of books, revision books as well, and then we have quite a lot of MCQs. We do get mock MCQs online, so there's a lot available online, which I did use and I'm still using. So because I intend to sit the exam in January, and there are MCQs available online which do imitate the exam, and it's under timed conditions. So that's what I am practicing right now, because the law, the content and the books, they're almost the same, but it's mainly about practice, I believe. So yeah, I have been using them quite a lot.
Thanks, Hafsa. And let's come back to you, Sian. We've had a question in about how far in advance would you recommend starting your study for SQE1?
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on different circumstances. I would say, yeah, as advanced as possible. I started with the training provider about 5 months before my SQE1 exam, and I did maybe a little bit of studying before this, but not a lot. So personally, that was my time frame. But it just also depends how much time you can give to studying as well. If you have more time to study, you know, the time frame may be shorter. But if you're working full time, like myself, then yeah, you may need some additional time. But I would just recommend start as soon as possible, because then you can see the materials and see how much, you know, content there is, and then plan that accordingly.
Thanks, Sian. And Amit, the same question to you. How far in advance would you recommend starting SQE1 study?
Sure. So I think if we deal with minimums, I think anything lesser than 3 months is probably impossible, because for me, with a lot of time at my hand and in a part-time job, it took me about 3 months to get through one pass of all the material for SQE1. And I think one pass is not enough, because by the time you reach the end of it, you have forgotten quite a chunk of what you did in the past several months. So you probably need a few passes of the materials before kind of the benefits of spaced repetition kick in. So I would say 4.5 minimum if you are doing on a part-time basis, and about 6, give or take, if you are in a full-time role.
Thanks, Amit. We'll stick with you, Amit, for this next question. And the question is, how did you revise the FLK for SQE2? Did you go into as much depth as you did for SQE1?
Initially, I was kind of skimming across the subject, but I quickly realized that I probably needed a little more in-depth knowledge because I had kind of shifted from self-study to a provider for SQE2. I chose to go back to my old sources in SQE1 as the source of my predominant FLK knowledge, because I just had familiarity with that material. And going through the same material it's a bit like watching the Matrix. You go through it again and you pick up something new again. So it was far better than kind of looking at an entirely new set of material for SQE2. So that was my strategy.
Thank you. And we'll stick with you again, Amit, I think, for this question. So someone's asked whether you've got any tips for practicing the oral parts of SQE2.
Sure. So I think on the advocacy bit, I mean, my course provider used to very helpfully give us a model answer for some of the questions that I had practiced. And watching the model answers, sometimes they were inspiring, of course, but they also were deflating because I used to compare my own performance to those model answers and feel like I'm not even a quarter there compared to what I've just witnessed. But the reality is advocacy, there's a very broad range of what is acceptable performance, and the standard expected of a newly qualified solicitor is probably something that you do have. So I would say please go there with some more conviction. You don't have to be perfect. It's your right to be heard in a court, and the same applies in the SQE advocacy exams. As far as the interviewing goes, the one thing I'd encourage is not to think about your next question whilst your client is answering the previous question, because it's quite acceptable to make the client wait whilst you reflect on the notes. In fact, one of the things you can also do is if you rush through the questions and you have spare time at the end, it's perfectly acceptable to ask the client to bear a moment while you check your notes if there's anything more to be done. I think people sometimes put a lot of pressure on themselves to have a free-flowing conversation, which I think is not necessarily required.
Thanks very much, Amit. So we're getting towards the end of our time today, but before we do end, what I want to do is I want to ask all of our speakers, including Richard, in 30 seconds or less, can you tell us what your top tip is for anyone who's currently studying SQE or is thinking about it? So let's go to you, Amit, first. What's your 30-second top tip?
That would be not to be too hard on yourself and to measure SQE readiness a little different to how most people do it. So getting MCQs is correct is a good thing, but usually a good measure of whether you're ready for SQE1 is if you can understand the question wholly and if you're capable of ruling out at least two bad options. Because if you can do that, there's a good chance that you will be ready for SQE1. And even someone in the top quintile can get 100 questions wrong and still be in the top quintile. So don't be too hard on yourself.
Thanks, Amit. And same question to you, Sean, your 30-second top tip.
Just, revise. But also when it comes to, the night before or a couple of nights before the exams, do give yourself maybe some extra break. I think, like we've discussed before, it is mentally draining the exam. A lot of people are tempted to revise until midnight, 1 a.m. Just to try and cram everything in. But you need to try and not do that because it's not going to help, and you need to save your energy for the day of the exam, just to absolutely try your best and give it all. So it's very important to get a good night's sleep, especially the night before.
Thanks, Sean. And now to you, Hafsa, your 30-second top tip, please.
Yeah, be consistent, organized, and practice. That's my tip.
Excellent, thank you. Very concise. And then finally, Richard, to you, any top tips from you?
I think my top tip is really about how you go about choosing the course or courses. I think, take time to think about what you know and what you don't know, and where the gaps are in terms of your knowledge, and take time to think about how best you learn. And I think the other thing to remember is that, you can kind of mix and match here as well. And again, the panelists have described some really good options. You don't have to take one particular course. You can supplement one type of learning with a different type of learning, which some are free. So think about how you kind of can get to where you want to be by thinking about lots of different kind of options and courses.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I think we're going to draw it to a close now. So thanks everyone for watching today. I hope you found it useful. And thanks very much to our speakers for being so open about their experiences. I think from my perspective, lots of really helpful advice and tips there. I think the three things that I took away whilst listening to you today are, if you're not yet on your SQE journey and you're thinking about trying to choose whether to self-study or to go with a training provider, then what I've heard from a number of our speakers today is it's really important to talk to other people that have already been through the journey, who can give you some help and advice. I think the second thing that I've heard is that it's really important to do lots of practice questions, but then thirdly, also to give yourself some time out for yourself, and don't overwork yourself, particularly the night before the exam. So lots of top tips there. So please remember that if you do want to watch this back, or you've got colleagues or friends that may be interested, this will be available on our YouTube channel. And also, please don't forget the feedback form, which, as I said, is on the link underneath the webinar. I say this every time I do one of these webinars, but we really do look at the feedback forms, and we really are interested in what you thought about this webinar and also about other topics that you may find of interest. So thanks again to our speakers and to Richard, and we'll end our session there today.